Beneath the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, where sunlight fades to blue-green mystery, and then to deeper darkness, there lie stories that refuse to stay submerged. Tamil memories of a homeland lost to rising seas, ancient poems speaking of drowned rivers and vanished kingdoms, meetings, and at the heart of it all, Kumari Kandam, a name that carries the weight of cultural memory, colonial trauma, and the endless human need to know where we truly come from. Tonight, we descend into those depths, not to debunk or diminish, but to understand what drowns and what survives, what the ocean takes and what memory preserves. This is a story about identity and geology, about cultural truth and physical fact, about how colonized peoples reclaim their narratives, and why origin stories matter even when they aren't literally true. It's complicated, it's layered, and like the ocean itself, it resists simple answers. The Indian Ocean at night is warmer than you might imagine. Its surface catches moonlight in silver patterns, but beneath those waves, beyond where light penetrates, there exists a landscape few will ever see. Submerged coastlines, drowned river valleys, and the remnants of settlements that once thrived when the sea stood 400 feet lower than it does tonight. This is not fantasy. This is geological fact. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, so much water was locked in ice sheets that coastlines extended far beyond their current boundaries, and when that ice melted, the ocean came for everything built along those ancient shores. But for the Tamil people, the Dravidian inhabitants of South India, whose language and culture stretch back into depths as profound as any ocean trench, the memory of drowned lands carries a specificity that transcends general geological history. It carries names Kumari, Paruli, the first two Sangams, entire kingdoms of sophisticated Tamil civilization, swallowed by floods described in literature over 2,000 years old. And here, in this specific cultural memory, we find something that matters far beyond questions of continental drift or plate tectonics. We find identity, continuity, and a people's insistence that they were here, creating beauty and knowledge long before history was willing to acknowledge them. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and whether you've heard of Kumari Kandam before. The story begins, as so many stories of memory do, with poetry. Between approximately 300 BCE and 300 CE, during what scholars call the Sangam period, Tamil poets created a body of literature so sophisticated, so technically accomplished, so emotionally resonant, that it stands among the great literary achievements of the ancient world. 2,381 poems, composed by 473 different poets, preserved in anthologies, with names like Purananuru, Akananuru, Patishupattu. These weren't simple verses or folk songs. This was literature demonstrating mastery of complex metrical forms, profound understanding of human psychology, and an urbanity that speaks to the existence of a refined, cosmopolitan culture. The Purananuru, one of the 8 anthologies of Sangam literature, contains 400 poems by 157 poets. Poems about war, about heroism, about the impermanence of earthly power. One poem describes a victorious king surveying his conquered lands. Another reflects on how even the greatest kingdoms become ruins overgrown with thorns. There's philosophical depth here, understanding of transience, acceptance of inevitable change. The Akananuru, another anthology, focuses on love and longing. 400 poems exploring the 5 landscapes of Tamil poetic tradition, each landscape representing different emotional states, different stages of love. The poems are short but precisely crafted, every image carefully chosen, every metaphor layered with meaning. This is not accidental composition. This is sophisticated literary craft that requires training, study, participation in an established tradition. The Tolkappiyam, predating even the Sangam poetry, is something else entirely, a treatise on Tamil grammar and poetics. It categorizes phonemes, describes rules for combination, establishes the principles of Tamil prosody, and it does this systematically, comprehensively, with analytical rigor that demonstrates not just linguistic knowledge, but metalinguistic understanding, the ability to examine language itself as an object of study. This is linguistics, this is science, and it's over 2,000 years old. When we read these texts, when we really engage with them, we encounter minds that think about the world with sophistication, that understand human psychology, that can craft images to evoke specific emotional responses, that play with meaning and metaphor and sound. These aren't primitive verses preserved by accident. This is high culture, literary culture, poetry that only emerges from a society with leisure time, patronage systems, educational institutions, and deep cultural investment in the power of language. The commentaries on these works, some written centuries later, but drawing on older interpretative traditions, reveal that Tamil scholars were analyzing their own literature, debating meanings, preserving variant readings, creating glossaries for words that had fallen out of use. This is textual scholarship. This is literary criticism. This demonstrates continuous engagement with a literary tradition across generations. Within this vast corpus, within these thousands of poems, are the references that would eventually crystallize into the Kumari Kandam narrative, references to the sea taking land, to coastal erosion, to flooding, to territories that once belonged to Tamil kings, but now belong to the ocean. Not many poems, not a dominant theme, but present, persistent, remembered. The Patishapachu, the 10 consists of 10 sets of 10 poems, each praising the Chera kings, describing their territories, their battles, their generosity to poets, their court culture. What's remarkable is the specificity. These aren't generic praise poems. They reference actual places, actual rulers, actual historical events. They give us a window into the political landscape of ancient South India, into the kingdoms that rose and fell, into the world the poets inhabited. The poems describe mountain passes and port cities, trade goods and military campaigns, the relationship between kings and their subjects, between patrons and artists, between power and its inevitable decay. Consider what it means that these poems survived, not etched in stone like royal proclamations, but copied by hand, generation after generation, preserved in palm leaf manuscripts that had to be recopied every few decades. Because the material itself degrades in the tropical climate, someone had to value these poems enough to do that work, to maintain that tradition, to ensure that voices from 2,000 years ago could still speak to us tonight. That's not accident. That's cultural commitment. That's a civilization that understood the power of memory, of language, of preserving what matters even when empires fall, and coastlines change, and the world transforms around you. And woven through this poetry, appearing again and again like a refrain of loss, are references to lands claimed by the sea. The Silapatikaram, an epic poem from the 2nd century CE, speaks of the sea swallowing the land where ancient Tamil kings once ruled. The Manamekalai, another classical Tamil text, references coastal regions lost to ocean waters, and the commentaries on these works, written by scholars in later centuries, elaborate on a specific geography of loss. The Paruli River, the Kumari River, regions south of the present Tamil lands that once thrived with cities and culture before the deluge came. According to the legend that would crystallize over centuries, there were not just one, but 3 Sangems, 3 great academies of Tamil literature and learning. The first Sangam, established in the most ancient times, gathered 4,449 poets over 4,440 years in the city of South Madurai. Then the ocean rose, and that entire civilization, that first Sangam, everything it had created, vanished beneath the waves. The second Sangam, re-established in the city of Kapatapuram, lasted 3,700 years, and included 3,700 poets, until it too was claimed by the sea. Only the third Sangam, the one established in the city we now call Madurai, on land that remains above water to this day, survived to pass its poetry down to us. Now, before we proceed further into these depths, we need to understand something crucial about cultural memory and historical narrative. These numbers, these time frames stretching across thousands upon thousands of years, they function differently than modern historical chronology. They operate in the realm of mythic time, where duration expresses significance rather than calendar years. This is how oral traditions preserve importance by expanding the temporal weight of events, making them feel as vast as they truly were in cultural impact. But here's what matters beneath the mythic inflation of years and poets, beneath the numerological symbolism. There exists a persistent core memory. The Tamil people remember their ancestors building cities and creating culture on lands that the ocean took. And this memory, this insistence deserves to be taken seriously, not necessarily as geological fact, but as something equally important as cultural truth, as identity, as a people's refusal to let colonization and dismissal erase their deep history. Because what happened next, in the story of how Kumari Kandam came to mean what it means today, involves another kind of submersion, the submersion of indigenous knowledge beneath colonial power. When the British arrived in India, bringing with them the certainty that only Europeans had produced real civilization, they encountered something that didn't fit their narrative. The Tamil language, with its literature stretching back beyond the Christian era, its sophisticated grammar, its obvious antiquity and continuity. The Sangam poems, demonstrably ancient and demonstrably accomplished, posed a problem for colonizers who needed to believe they were bringing civilization to primitive peoples. The British solution, like so many colonial solutions, was dismissal. The dates couldn't possibly be that old. The sophistication must be exaggerated. The claims of ancient Tamil kingdoms were surely fantasy. This wasn't just academic disagreement. This was systematic cultural violence, the erasure of a people's history in service of justifying their subjugation. Imagine being a Tamil scholar in the 19th century, educated in your own tradition, knowing the sophistication of Sangam poetry, understanding the antiquity of Tamil grammar, aware of your language's literary heritage, and then encountering British academics who tell you that everything you know about your own culture is wrong, that your dates are inflated, that your achievements are borrowed, that your pride is based on fantasy. The psychological impact of this dismissal cannot be overstated. For colonized peoples, having your history erased or minimized is a form of violence. It disconnects you from your ancestors, makes you doubt your heritage, destabilizes your sense of worth. If your culture has no great past, why should it have a respected future? If your people never achieved anything significant, why should you resist your subjugation? This is why colonial powers always attack history, always rewrite, always minimize, because if they can convince you that you've never been great, that you've never been sophisticated, that you've always needed outside guidance, then resistance becomes psychologically harder. The British Orientalists who studied Indian texts approached with preset conclusions: white Europeans at civilization's apex, Indians occupying a middle position, more advanced than Africans, but fundamentally inferior to Europeans, and within India, the Aryans from the north, with their Sanskrit texts and Vedic traditions, were granted more recognition than the Dravidian peoples of the south. This wasn't accident. This was deliberate construction of a historical narrative that supported colonial rule. If Indians were backward, primitive, incapable of sophisticated culture without outside influence, then British rule became not oppression but tutelage, not exploitation but development, not theft but guidance. When British scholars focus primarily on Sanskrit literature, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the epics, these were granted antiquity, importance, sophistication. Sanskrit was recognized as related to European languages, part of the Indo-European family. This linguistic connection made Sanskrit more acceptable to European scholars, more familiar, less foreign. Tamil, by contrast, was Dravidian, unrelated to European languages, its grammar structured differently, its antiquity harder for Europeans to accept, and its literature, when British scholars bothered to examine it, was often dismissed or dated later than Tamil scholars claimed. The argument went something like this: any sophistication in Tamil literature must derive from Sanskrit influence. Tamil civilization must have developed only after Aryan migrations brought civilization from the north. Tamil cannot possibly be as old as its own scholars claim, because that would contradict the narrative of northern cultural priority. And Tamil claims of ancient kingdoms, of sophisticated urban culture, of literary academies like the Sangams, must be later fabrications, myth-making by a people trying to inflate their importance. Every element of Tamil pride, every claim to antiquity, every assertion of indigenous cultural development was met with skepticism or outright denial. That Tamil scholars knew better. They could read the Sangam poems, they understood the linguistic sophistication of their language, they knew their astronomical texts, their mathematical contributions, their architectural achievements. They knew the British were lying, but they needed to prove it in terms the British would accept. They needed evidence so overwhelming that even European racism couldn't dismiss it. And into this context, into this desperate need for validation, came Lemuria. If you're finding this exploration of Tamil memory and mystery compelling, take a moment to like this video. In 1864, a British zoologist named Philip Sclater noticed something curious about the distribution of lemurs. These primates lived in India, Madagascar, and various Indian Ocean islands, but not in Africa or the Middle East. How could lemurs exist on land masses separated by thousands of miles of ocean, unless those land masses had once been connected? Sclater proposed a now submerged continent, which he called Lemuria, that had once linked these regions before sinking beneath the Indian Ocean. At the time, before plate tectonics was understood, before continental drift was accepted, before we knew how land masses actually move across the planet's surface, the idea of vanished continents seemed scientifically plausible. The German biologist Ernst Haeckel went further, proposing that Lemuria might have been the origin point of the human species, the cradle of humanity now lost beneath the waves. This hypothesis, this scientific speculation from the Victorian era, traveled to Tamil scholars, and in it, they recognized something that resonated with frequencies deeper than geology. They recognized their Sangam legends, the lost lands, the drowned kingdoms, the ancient Tamil civilization that predated the northern Aryan invasions. All of it suddenly had not just cultural memory but scientific backing, or so it seemed. Tamil intellectuals of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, part of a cultural renaissance that sought to reclaim Tamil identity from beneath colonial erasure, began to connect Lemuria with the lost lands described in their ancient texts. Lemuria became Kumari Kandam, the vanished continent became the Tamil homeland. The first and second Sangams had gathered not on some modestly submerged coastal strip, but on a landmass comparable to Australia in size, stretching from the southern tip of India all the way past Madagascar. The scholar Devanir Pavanar, writing in the mid-20th century, elaborated the theory extensively. Kumari Kandam had been a vast continent, the cradle of Tamil civilization, and possibly of human civilization itself. When it sank, survivors had fled northward, carrying their advanced culture with them, becoming the Dravidian peoples of South India. This narrative positioned Tamil culture not as peripheral to world history, but as central to it, not as derivative of Sanskrit civilization from the north, but as prior to it, more ancient, more original. And here's what makes this even more layered. Even though there wasn't a continent-sized Kumari Kandam, the core memory that gave rise to the legend, the memory of lands lost to the sea, that memory is absolutely real, because the ocean did take Tamil lands, just not an entire continent. During the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets locked away vast quantities of water, sea levels stood approximately 400 feet lower than they do tonight. The continental shelf, the shallow underwater extension of the land mass, was exposed, habitable, and almost certainly inhabited. The coastline of South India extended far beyond its present position. The Gulf of Mannar, the Polk Strait. These were not bodies of water but land, valleys, forests, places where people built settlements and lived their lives. And then the ice melted, starting around 19,000 years ago, and accelerating during pulses of rapid melting. The ocean rose, not all at once, but inexorably, decade by decade, generation by generation, swallowing coastlines, flooding river valleys, and absolutely drowning human settlements that had the misfortune of being built at the old sea level. This wasn't unique to Tamil lands. It happened globally. Doggerland in the North Sea, Sunderland in Southeast Asia, coastlines everywhere went underwater. But it definitely happened to the Tamil coast, and communities living there, fishing, trading, creating culture, would have watched their world disappear, and those who survived would have carried the memory inland. Oral traditions can preserve memories for remarkably long periods. Aboriginal Australian stories describe the flooding of coastlines in ways that match geological evidence of sea level rise 7,000 years ago. Is it possible that Tamil cultural memory, passed down through countless generations in the form of poetry and legend, preserves echoes of real coastal flooding, real loss of homeland to the rising sea? The answer appears to be yes. Because we have evidence, not of continent-sized Kumari Kandam, but of something almost as remarkable: actual submerged Tamil settlements, real drowned cities, archaeological sites that prove the Sangam poets weren't inventing their references to lands claimed by the ocean. Off the coast of Pumpur, also called Kavaripattinam, a real Tamil port city mentioned extensively in Sangam literature, marine archaeologists have found structural remains underwater. The city was a major trading center during the Sangam period, described in the Silapatikaram as a wealthy port where ships arrived from Rome, from Egypt, from Southeast Asia, and now parts of it lie beneath the Bay of Bengal. Walls have been identified, artifacts recovered. The ocean demonstrably swallowed a significant Tamil city. The Silapatikaram provides detailed descriptions of Pumpur, its harbour crowded with vessels, its streets lined with shops, its warehouses full of imported goods, its temples, its royal palace, its city walls. Reading these descriptions while knowing that parts of this city now lie underwater creates a strange temporal vertigo. The poem describes a living city, and we're discovering that city's ruins on the seafloor. Beginning in the 1990s, marine archaeologists using side-scan sonar detected anomalous structures approximately 23 meters underwater. Subsequent diving expeditions recovered artifacts, pottery shards, brick structures, objects consistent with ancient habitation. Radiocarbon dating of some materials suggested occupation in the early centuries CE, exactly when Sangam literature describes Pumpur as a thriving port. What likely happened was gradual coastal erosion combined with possible tsunami events. The Bay of Bengal is tectonically active, tsunamis are historically documented, and the 2004 tsunami demonstrated how vulnerable coastal cities are to these events. Pumpur may have been partially abandoned due to coastal erosion, then catastrophically damaged by tsunami, with survivors relocating inland, the ocean then completing what the initial disaster began, gradually submerging the ruins. The underwater remains show signs of both processes. Some structures appear to have collapsed suddenly, others eroded gradually, silted over by sediments deposited year after year as the coastline retreated. Divers working at the site describe an eerie experience, swimming over the foundations of a city that once bustled with life, seeing pottery shards scattered across the seafloor, exactly as they might have been when the city was occupied, as if the inhabitants simply walked away yesterday rather than 1,500 years ago. The preservative quality of seawater means that some artifacts remain remarkably intact, protected by sand and silt from the oxidation that would destroy them on land. but the marine environment also complicates interpretation. Currents redistribute objects, marine organisms colonize structures, sediments bury and reveal sites in cycles, determined by storms and tides. Near Mahabalipuram, south of Chennai, local legends spoke for centuries of 7 pagodas, with 6 of them submerged beneath the waves. Modern underwater surveys have revealed extensive structural remains offshore, what appear to be temple complexes, walls, carved stones, constructions that predate the famous shore temple that still stands on the beach. The legends weren't entirely fantasy. There are structures underwater. The ocean did take them. The Mahabalipuram discoveries are particularly intriguing because they suggest a much larger temple complex than what survives on land. The shore temple we can visit today might be just one surviving element of what was once an extensive sacred site along the coast. Underwater photography has captured carved stones bearing inscriptions, structural elements showing the same architectural style as the shore temple, what appear to be compound walls defining sacred precincts now open to fish and currents. Some researchers have proposed that Mahabalipuram was affected by the same tsunami that might have damaged Pumpura, though the evidence is ambiguous. Historical records and geological evidence suggest significant tsunami events in the region, including one around 950 CE that could have devastated coastal structures. Whatever the cause, something forced portions of Mahabalipuram underwater, and the fact that local legends preserved this memory, speaking of submerged temples, demonstrates how coastal communities maintain oral traditions of catastrophic loss across generations. In the Gulf of Mannar, divers and archaeologists have discovered pottery, anchor stones, remains of what might be harbor structures, evidence of human activity now lying beneath the sea, and satellite imagery combined with side-scan sonar reveals submerged landscape features, old river channels, coastal formations, the drowned topography of a coastline that once extended farther south. The Gulf of Mannar research has identified multiple sites with archaeological potential, concentrations of artifacts, anomalous formations, areas where the seafloor topography suggests human modification. Each site requires careful investigation, mapping, sampling, recovery of artifacts for dating and analysis. This work proceeds slowly because underwater archaeology is expensive, technically challenging, and requires specialized equipment and training, but the results are accumulating, building a picture of extensive human activity along coastlines that are now submerged, fishing communities, trading posts, ports, settlements that were viable when sea level was lower or before coastal erosion claimed them. This is real evidence of real Tamil communities living on lands that the ocean eventually took. Adam's Bridge, also called Ramasetu, that 30-mile chain of limestone shoals and sandbars stretching between India and Sri Lanka, has been another focal point of investigation and speculation. Is it a natural formation, which geology suggests it is, a legacy of the region's complex geological history? Or could it contain evidence of human construction, of an ancient causeway built when sea levels were lower? The question remains contested in popular imagination, though geologists are fairly confident about the answer. What's certain is that during the last ice age, this entire area was above water, and people could have, probably did, walk across what is now the Polk Strait. The geology of Adam's Bridge is actually quite interesting in its own right. The limestone shoals appear to be remnants of a former land bridge, formed naturally through a combination of reef growth, sediment deposition, and changes in sea level over millions of years. Core samples show no evidence of human construction, no quarried stones, no artificial arrangement, nothing that would indicate human engineering. What we see is consistent with natural processes that have been operating in this region for geological timescales. However, and this is important, just because the current structure is natural doesn't mean humans didn't use this route extensively. During the last glacial maximum when sea level was 400 feet lower, this area would have been completely dry, a land bridge connecting India and Sri Lanka. Humans almost certainly crossed here, established routes, maybe modified the landscape in minor ways that have been completely erased by subsequent submersion and 20,000 years of natural processes. Satellite imagery of the region, particularly NASA's remote sensing data, has sparked renewed interest because it reveals the submerged topography with striking clarity. You can see the chain of shoals, the underwater ridge, the way it connects the two land masses. From space, Isavshogin to Fim. It's Suruv from space. The connection that would have been walkable during the Ice Age is visible, a ghostly bridge beneath the waves. This visibility feeds into legends and claims, but geologically it's explainable without invoking human construction. The real story Adam's Bridge tells is about sea level change, about how radically different this region looked during the Ice Age, about the land bridge that connected India and Sri Lanka, about the human migrations that certainly occurred across this now submerged landscape. This is the actual history, fascinating in its own right, without needing mythic enhancement. Beyond these specific sites, the entire continental shelf off South India and Sri Lanka represents drowned landscape, a world that existed and then disappeared beneath rising waters. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea level stood roughly 400 feet lower than today. The coastline extended miles beyond its present position. The continental shelf was exposed dry land. River valleys that are now submarine canyons were actual river valleys, flowing through landscapes that supported forests and grasslands. People lived there, hunted there, gathered there, built settlements and created culture on land that is now dozens or hundreds of feet underwater. This isn't speculation or wishful thinking. This is established glacial geology, confirmed by multiple lines of evidence. We can map the ancient coastlines using bathymetric data, identifying the drowned river systems through their characteristic topography, understanding the landscape of the exposed shelf through sediment analysis and fossil assemblages, and we know with absolute certainty that humans would have lived on this land. Coastal environments are attractive to human populations. Access to marine resources, fresh water from rivers, fertile valleys for agriculture. Every exposed coastline in human history has been inhabited, and there's no reason the exposed Sunda Shelf and South Indian Shelf would have been any different. When the ice melted, sea level rise was neither gradual nor steady. It occurred in pulses, periods of rapid rise interspersed with slower periods, driven by the complex dynamics of ice sheet collapse and meltwater release. Meltwater Pulse 1A, approximately 14,600 years ago, saw sea level rise perhaps 50–60 feet in just a few centuries. In human terms, this would have been catastrophic for coastal communities. Imagine watching the shore retreat year after year, decade after decade, within a single lifetime. Entire landscapes disappearing within human memory, forcing people to migrate inland, abandoning settlements to the waves, carrying with them memories of the lands the ocean took. Meltwater Pulse 1b, around 11,500 years ago, represented another period of rapid rise, and the sustained melting between these pulses meant that over the course of several thousand years, roughly from 20,000 to 6,000 years ago, coastlines worldwide retreated by miles, valleys flooded, islands submerged, and humanity's relationship with the ocean was defined by loss, by retreat, by the memory of lands that drowned. This was a global phenomenon. It happened in Europe with the submersion of Doggerland, in Southeast Asia with the flooding of Sunderland, in Southeast Asia with the flooding of Sunderland, along every coastline worldwide, but it definitely happened to the Tamil coast. This is the context for understanding Tamil cultural memory. Tamil communities were living through this period of environmental transformation, watching their coastlines change, losing settlements to rising waters. And that experience, that trauma, would have been encoded in oral tradition, passed down through generations in the form of stories, and eventually written into the Sangam poems that reference floods and lost lands. The key distinction is one of scale and timing. Geologists find no evidence of a continent-sized landmass like Kumari Kandam submerging during human history. but they find abundant evidence of extensive coastal drowning, of shorelines retreating miles, of valleys flooding, of settlements becoming submerged. So the core memory is real, the specifics have been expanded through mythic elaboration, but there's a factual foundation beneath the legend. Recent underwater surveys using advanced sonar technology are revealing more than anyone expected. LiDAR imaging that can penetrate water, multi-beam echo sounders that create detailed bathymetric maps, satellite-based synthetic aperture radar that can detect submerged features. These technologies show the submerged landscape in unprecedented detail, and what they reveal are coastlines far more complex than simple gradual drowning. There are stepped terraces showing different sea level stands, marking pauses in the rise when the sea stabilized temporarily before rising again. There are drowned river mouths, clearly visible as incised valleys cutting across the shelf. There are submerged valleys showing the typical V-shape of river-cut landscapes. There are paleo shorelines marking where the coast once stood, recognizable by concentrations of shell material and changes in sediment type. And on some of these paleo shorelines, archaeologists are beginning to find artifacts. Stone tools at depth, indicating human presence on landscapes now submerged. Pottery fragments that can be dated, providing chronologies of coastal occupation. Midden deposits containing shells and fish bones, marking the locations of ancient settlements. Each discovery is painstaking, requiring extensive survey, careful excavation in difficult underwater conditions, rigorous analysis of materials that have been submerged for thousands of years. But each discovery pushes back our understanding of how long people have lived along these coasts, how extensively they used what is now submerged terrain, how rich and complex was the world that the rising sea took. Consider subscribing to Simply About Earth, where curiosity finds its quiet corner and wonder takes its time. And this brings us to the deeper question, the one that matters more than geological specifics. Why do origin stories matter? And what do they do for a people? Identity is not constructed from facts alone. It is woven from stories, from continuity, from the sense that your people have always been your people, that your culture has deep roots, that you belong to something ancient and worthy of respect. For colonized peoples, for communities whose histories have been dismissed or erased or claimed as primitive, origin stories serve a psychological and cultural function that transcends their literal geological accuracy. When British colonizers insisted that Indian civilization was young, derivative, less sophisticated than European culture, they weren't making a neutral academic argument. They were providing justification for subjugation. If Indians were culturally inferior, if they had no great ancient past, then British rule became not conquest but civilizing mission. This required the systematic devaluation of Indian achievement, the dating of texts to be later than they were, the attribution of innovations to outside influence rather than indigenous creativity. Tamil scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries, looking at their own Sangam literature, knowing its sophistication, knowing its antiquity, and watching it be dismissed by colonial academics, needed something the colonizers couldn't dismiss. They needed validation in terms the colonizers would have to respect. They needed science. Kumari Kandam provided that, or seemed to. If Victorian scientists were proposing a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, if that continent could be connected to Tamil legends of drowned lands, then Tamil claims of great antiquity had Western scientific backing. The very people doing the dismissing had provided evidence for what they were dismissing. That this science turned out to be wrong, that Lemuria was a hypothesis discarded once plate tectonics was understood, doesn't make the Tamil claim to antiquity wrong, because here's the crucial point. Tamil civilization doesn't need Kumari Kandam to be ancient, doesn't need a vanished continent to be sophisticated, doesn't need pseudoscience to be worthy of respect. The actual documented history of Tamil culture is extraordinary enough. The Sangam literature, regardless of exactly how old it is demonstrably ancient and demonstrably sophisticated. The Tolkappiyam, a Tamil grammatical treatise, is one of the oldest works of linguistics in the world. Tamil is one of the longest continuously spoken languages, with over 2,000 years of literary tradition. The Chola Empire, Tamil kingdom that flourished from the 9th to 13th centuries CE, was one of the most powerful maritime empires in medieval Asia. Chola naval expeditions reached Southeast Asia. Chola administrators established Tamil influence in what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. Chola bronze sculptures are considered among the finest metalwork ever produced, and the Brihadisvara temple, built by the Chola king Raja Raja, is an architectural marvel that demonstrates sophisticated understanding of engineering, aesthetics, and monumental construction. Raja Chola, ruling from 985 to 1014 CE, built an empire that stretched from the Maldives to the Ganges River. His navy controlled the Bay of Bengal. His armies conquered territories in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. The Brihadisvara temple in Thanjavur, completed in 1010 CE, stands 13 stories tall. Its tower rises over 200 feet, carved from a single piece of granite, weighing approximately 80 tons, that was somehow transported to the top of the structure. How did they do this? Engineers still debate the methods, but the achievement is undeniable. This temple demonstrates understanding of structural engineering, of weight distribution, of architectural aesthetics, of stone carving techniques, of organizational capacity to mobilize the labor and resources required. The bronze sculptures produced during the Chola period, particularly the images of Shiva as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, are considered by art historians among the finest bronze work ever created by any culture. The proportions are perfect, the movement captured despite the static medium, the symbolism layered and complex. These weren't crude idols. These were sophisticated artistic productions that required not just skill but artistic vision, understanding of the human form, mastery of lost wax casting techniques. The inscriptions covering the temple walls tell us something remarkable about Chola administration. They record land grants, tax assessments, temple endowments, the responsibilities of different officials, the salaries of priests and dancers and musicians. This is bureaucracy, sophisticated governance, record-keeping that rivals anything in medieval Europe. The Cholas didn't just build monuments. They built systems, institutions that could manage vast territories and complex economies. Tax records survive, showing how revenue from specific villages was allocated to temple maintenance, how trade duties were collected at ports, how the empire financed its military campaigns and public works. Each Nataraja sculpture shows Shiva dancing within a ring of flames, 1 foot raised, multiple arms holding symbolic objects. His face serene, despite the cosmic destruction and creation he embodies. The technical precision required to cast these figures, the understanding of weight and balance, the ability to create such fluid motion in metal. This represents generations of accumulated expertise. Rajendra Chola I, son of Raja Raja, took Chola power even further. His naval expedition in 1025 CE reached the Srivijaya Empire in Sumatra, over 2,000 miles from the Tamil homeland. His forces attacked and plundered the Srivijaya capital, bringing back treasure and establishing Chola dominance over Indian Ocean trade routes. This wasn't exploration. This was power projection, naval warfare on an enormous scale, logistics that could sustain an expeditionary force across thousands of miles of ocean. The inscriptions commemorating this victory list the spoils, gold, pearls, elephants, and the submission of foreign kings. They also mention the capture of Srivijaya's sacred artifacts, suggesting that this was as much about asserting cultural and religious supremacy as about material gain. Tamil merchants during this period established communities throughout Southeast Asia, in what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia. These weren't just trading posts. These were cultural transplants. Temples were built in Indian style, Sanskrit and Tamil inscriptions appear on monuments. Hindu and Buddhist practices were adopted by local rulers. The cultural influence flowed outward from Tamil lands, shaping civilizations across maritime Asia. In the temples of Angkor Wat, you can see Tamil architectural influences. In the court rituals of medieval Java, you can trace elements of Tamil practice. The Chola maritime network wasn't just about commerce, it was about the spread of ideas, artistic styles, religious practices, creating a cosmopolitan cultural sphere that spanned the Indian Ocean. The Tamil merchant guilds, like the Ayavol and Manigram, were sophisticated commercial organizations. They established trading networks, negotiated with foreign rulers, provided credit, transported goods. Some inscriptions describe them arbitrating disputes, maintaining caravanserai, protecting trade routes. This was organized commerce on an intercontinental scale, requiring legal frameworks, financial instruments, communication systems. These weren't simple peddlers or itinerant traders. These were corporate entities with permanent establishments in multiple countries, with written contracts and accounting systems, with the ability to coordinate activities across vast distances. Tamil ships, according to contemporary accounts, were large and sophisticated, capable of carrying hundreds of passengers and enormous cargoes. They used monsoon winds for navigation, understanding seasonal patterns of wind and current. Tamil sailors knew the routes to Southeast Asia, to Arabia, to East Africa, to the Red Sea. They understood celestial navigation, could read weather signs, possessed geographic knowledge, accumulated over centuries of voyaging. Arab merchants writing about the Indian Ocean trade described Tamil ships with admiration, noting their size, their seaworthiness, their ability to undertake long ocean voyages. The technology to build these vessels, the understanding of hull design, of sail rigging, of navigation, represent sophisticated maritime engineering. Tamil contributions to mathematics deserve particular attention. The Tamil mathematical tradition included work on permutations and combinations, on numerical systems, on astronomical calculations. The concept of zero, the decimal place value system, early ideas about binary representation. Tamil mathematicians were exploring these concepts even as they were being developed elsewhere. Tamil scholars were calculating planetary positions, eclipse predictions, understanding celestial mechanics at a sophisticated level. The astronomical texts show awareness of the precession of equinoxes, understanding that the Earth was spherical, calculations of its circumference with remarkable accuracy. This was empirical science, observation-based knowledge about the cosmos, the kind of systematic investigation that characterizes advanced civilizations. In architecture beyond temples, Tamil engineers built extensive irrigation systems, tanks and channels that stored monsoon rains and distributed water through dry seasons. The Grand Anicut Dam on the Kaveri River, built in the 2nd century CE and still functioning today, demonstrates both engineering sophistication and understanding of hydrology. These weren't simple ditches, these were complex water management systems requiring surveying, grading, maintenance, bureaucratic organization. The irrigation networks transformed agriculture, allowing multiple crops per year, supporting dense populations, creating the economic surplus that funded temples and armies and artistic production. Some of these tanks covered hundreds of acres, with elaborate sluice systems to control water flow, with maintenance protocols that ensured they functioned for centuries. The Tamil philosophical tradition, expressed through Shaivite and Vaishnavite devotional movements, produced profound thinkers. The Nayanars and Alvars, poet-saints, whose verses explore the relationship between individual soul and divine, influenced the development of Hindu devotional traditions across India. This was original theological thinking, not derivative of Sanskrit traditions but developing in parallel in Tamil language, expressing distinctly Tamil religious sensibility. The poems of these saints are still sung in temples today, still shape how millions of people understand their relationship to the divine. They wrestle with questions of grace and free will, of the nature of divine love, of how the finite can approach the infinite. Questions that preoccupied medieval Christian theologians and Islamic philosophers, being explored here in South India in Tamil verse. So when we catalogue Tamil achievements, when we really look at what this civilization accomplished, we find sophisticated literature, advanced architecture, powerful naval capability, extensive trade networks, mathematical and astronomical knowledge, sophisticated arts, medical systems, philosophical traditions, engineering expertise. All of this documented, all of this proven, all of this real. This is why Kumari Kandam is ultimately unnecessary. Tamil civilization's actual history is extraordinary. It doesn't need mythic enhancement to be impressive. It doesn't need a lost continent to prove its worth. What Tamil culture achieved on dry land, on the India that remained above water, is remarkable enough. But telling a colonized people that their cherished origin story isn't literally true, even when that's scientifically accurate, often sounds to them like more dismissal, more erasure, more of the same colonial denial of their significance. This is why conversations about Kumari Kandam remain fraught, why they generate such passionate defense, why geological facts alone don't resolve the matter. What's needed instead is something harder, more nuanced. We need to hold both truths simultaneously. Geological truth, there was no continent-sized Kumari Kandam, and cultural truth, Tamil civilization is ancient, sophisticated, worthy of profound respect. And yes, the ocean did take some of their coastal lands. Their memory of loss is rooted in reality, even if the scale has been expanded through mythic time. We need to understand that Kumari Kandam as cultural symbol matters more than Kumari Kandam as geography. It represents Tamil identity, Tamil pride, Tamil refusal to be erased. And those things are real regardless of what's actually underwater. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored. We have better maps of the moon than of the ocean floor. Underwater archaeology in the Indian Ocean is still in relatively early stages. What we know for certain is that during the last ice age, extensive areas now underwater were dry land. People lived there, hunted there, built there, and we have barely begun to investigate what remains. Stone tools have been found in underwater contexts, pottery fragments, anchors, fishing weights. Each discovery hints at the richness of what might remain undiscovered, and new technologies, submersible drones, advanced sonar mapping, satellite imaging, that can detect submerged structures through water. These tools are revealing more every year, so when people ask whether there's anything to the Kumari Kandam legend, whether the ocean is hiding something significant, the honest answer is, we don't know everything that's down there. We know there wasn't a continent, but we're still discovering the full extent of what the rising seas submerged, and some of it, like the drowned Tamil ports, definitely validates aspects of the cultural memory. The genetic evidence is suggestive too. Studies of Indian populations reveal ancient lineages. The Dravidian peoples of South India carry genetic signatures suggesting long continuity in the region. They're not recent arrivals, not derivative of other populations, but indigenous people with deep roots, exactly as their own traditions maintain. Research into language families places Tamil in the Dravidian family, distinct from the Indo-European languages of North India. This linguistic independence supports the cultural narrative of Tamil civilization as developing along its own trajectory, not borrowed from the north but indigenous to the south. And when we look at the actual Sangam poems, reading them not as historical documents but as literature, we encounter voices that feel genuinely ancient, genuinely sophisticated, genuinely worthy of the respect Tamil culture has always claimed they deserve. Purananuru, one of the Sangam anthologies, contains poems about war and wisdom, about the impermanence of power and the persistence of memory. One poem speaks of how the ocean consumed the land, how what was once forest is now waves, how the gods themselves could not prevent the flooding. This isn't primitive verse, This is sophisticated poetry that understands loss, change, the indifference of natural forces to human attachment. Another poem describes the port city of Kavarepatinam, with ships from many nations, streets busy with merchants, warehouses full of goods from across the known world. This is cosmopolitanism, urban sophistication, economic complexity, and it dates to before the Common Era. These works weren't transmitted through conquest or colonial education. They survived because Tamil communities valued them, preserved them, copied them, transmitted them, maintained their language and literary tradition through centuries of political upheaval, through invasions, through colonial rule, through modernization. Tamil literature persisted because Tamil identity persisted, because the culture refused to be submerged even when portions of their homeland literally were. This is what Kumari Kandam really represents. Not a geological claim but a spiritual one, not a continent but continuity, not pseudoscience, but the insistence that Tamil people have always been here, have always been creating beauty and meaning, have always mattered, and in that sense, Kumari Kandam is absolutely real as any story that shapes identity, as true as any narrative that gives a people strength to persist. The question then becomes, how do we honor both the cultural truth and the geological facts? How do we respect Tamil identity while also respecting science? How do we acknowledge what matters without pretending that wishing makes continents real? Perhaps it starts with changing what we're arguing about. Stop debating whether Kumari Kandam existed and start acknowledging what definitely exists. Tamil civilization, Tamil achievement, Tamil antiquity, Tamil right to define their own history rather than having it defined by others. Perhaps it means celebrating the actual underwater discoveries, treating each drowned Tamil settlement not as disappointment that it's not a whole continent, but as validation that the ocean did take something, that the memory has substance, that investigation is worthwhile. Perhaps it means being more curious about what we haven't found yet, more open to the possibility that our understanding of ancient Indian Ocean cultures is incomplete, more willing to fund research, more interested in filling the gaps. Perhaps it means understanding that when someone speaks of Kumari Kandam, they might be speaking less about geography and more about heritage, less about continents and more about continuity, less about what's underwater and more about what's unsubmergible, identity, pride, refusal to be erased. The deep ocean, at this hour of night, is perhaps the closest we can come in our world to absolute darkness. Yet even there, miles down where no surface light penetrates, life persists. Strange creatures adapted to pressure and cold and perpetual night. Bioluminescent fish creating their own light. Communities around hydrothermal vents. Ecosystems that don't need the sun. Life finding a way to exist even in the most inhospitable depths. Cultural memory is like that. It persists in the dark. It adapts. It creates its own light when the surrounding world tries to extinguish it. Tamil memory of ancient greatness, of lands lost to the sea, of sophisticated ancestors creating beauty before colonizers arrived, to tell them they were primitive. That memory survived centuries of dismissal, and it manifested as Kumari Kandam, as a story that said we were here, we were great, we will not be erased. And in the grand scope of human history, that's not delusion, that's survival. Every culture has origin stories, foundation myths, narratives that explain where they came from and why they matter. The Greeks had Atlantis, the Romans had Trojan ancestry, the British had Arthurian legends, Americans have the frontier. These stories serve functions beyond historical accuracy. They create cohesion, identity, shared meaning. They tell a people who they are. Tamil culture deserves the same respect, the same understanding that their origin story serves valid cultural purposes, even if it's not geologically literal. Kumari Kandam does for Tamil identity what other foundation myths do for other peoples. It provides a narrative of greatness, of loss, of persistence despite catastrophe. It says we survived the flood, we preserved our culture, we are still here. And the remarkable thing, the thing that makes this story different from pure fantasy, is that significant parts of it are actually true. There was sophisticated ancient Tamil civilization, check, the Sangam literature proves it. The ocean did take Tamil lands, check, Poompuar, and other sites prove it. Tamil culture does have extraordinary antiquity and continuity, check, the linguistic and genetic evidence proves it. Survivors of coastal flooding did move inland and preserve their traditions, check, the cultural continuity proves it. The only part that's not supported is the continental scale, and even that might be understood, not as fraud but as mythic expansion. The same process that makes the first and second Sangams last thousands of years, the same process that turns historical events into epics, the same process by which all cultures transform their histories into legends. If we can understand that the Odyssey preserves memories of real Bronze Age Greece, even though nobody actually fought the Cyclops, if we can appreciate that the Epic of Gilgamesh reflects real Mesopotamian culture, even though Gilgamesh didn't actually visit the literal underworld, then we can understand that Kumari Kandam reflects real Tamil history, even though the continent didn't literally exist at that scale. The ocean doesn't care about our arguments, about our debates over what's real versus what's symbolic. It simply is, rising and falling with ice ages and interglacials, patient, indifferent, keeping its secrets in the dark. And down in those depths, buried in sediment, scattered across the submerged continental shelf, lie fragments of the real story, pottery shards, stone tools, structural remains, artifacts waiting to be discovered that will tell us more about who lived on those now drowned coastlines, what they created, how they lived, what was lost when the water rose. Marine archaeologists continue to search, continue to map, continue to dive, slowly building a clearer picture of ancient coastlines and the peoples who inhabited them. Each discovery adds to our understanding, shifts our perspective, reminds us that history is not fixed but constantly being revised as new evidence emerges. Perhaps someday, using technologies we're only beginning to develop, we'll map every inch of the submerged continental shelf off South India. We'll locate every ancient settlement, date every artifact, understand exactly what was there before the flood, and when that day comes, we might find that the ocean hid, more than anyone expected, that Tamil coastal culture was more extensive, more sophisticated, more ancient than currently proven, or we might find roughly what we expect, evidence consistent with what we already know, settlements matching the Sangam period, and earlier, nothing continent-sized but plenty of drowned coastline, validation of cultural memory without validation of mythic expansion. Either way, Tamil civilization remains extraordinary. Tamil culture remains worthy of profound respect. Tamil identity remains rooted in genuine antiquity and accomplishment. The facts don't need mythic enhancement to be impressive, and maybe that's the real story worth telling. Not Kumari Kandam the continent, but Tamil persistence, not the lost land mass, but the culture that survived losing land, not the mythic homeland, but the very real achievement of maintaining identity and tradition through millennia of change, invasion, colonization, and dismissal. Because what colonialism tried to submerge wasn't just pride but truth. The truth that Indian civilizations were ancient, sophisticated, worthy. The truth that Tamil culture specifically had accomplished remarkable things. The truth that the Sangam poets were genuine literary masters. The truth that Tamil mathematics, architecture, philosophy, and art deserved recognition as significant human achievements. British colonizers needed Indians to be inferior, to be recent, to be derivative, to justify ruling them. And when Tamil scholars pointed to their ancient literature, the colonizers dismissed it, dated it later, attributed it to outside influence, erased and diminished at every turn. Kumari Kandam was, in part, a response to that erasure. An overcorrection perhaps, but an understandable one. If the colonizers won't acknowledge your documented achievements, claim something so vast they can't ignore it. If they won't respect your continuous literary tradition, connect it to a vanished continent, they themselves theorized, use their own science against their dismissal. The tragedy is that it wasn't necessary. Tamil accomplishment on dry land was always enough. But colonized peoples can't always see that through the haze of systematic cultural violence. They need the biggest claim, the oldest dates, the most impressive scale to overcome the sheer weight of denial they face. And now, decades after independence, in an India where Tamil identity doesn't need to justify itself to British colonizers anymore, Kumari Kandam persists. Because it's no longer about convincing colonizers. It's about internal identity, about Tamil pride in the face of linguistic politics within India, about maintaining distinctiveness, about having an origin story that's uniquely Tamil rather than derivative of northern Indian narratives. This is why the conversation remains complicated, politically fraught, emotionally charged. Kumari Kandam isn't just about geology. It's about identity, language politics, regional pride, post-colonial self-definition, all of which matter immensely even if the continent didn't literally exist. So where does this leave us? Floating in these dark waters, surrounded by questions without simple answers. It leaves us, perhaps, with humility, with the recognition that human cultures are complex, that origin stories serve psychological purposes. We shouldn't dismiss just because they're not literally factual, that dismissing someone's cherished narrative, even when scientifically accurate, can be a form of violence. It leaves us with respect for Tamil culture specifically, for its real documented achievements, for its persistence, for its right to define its own identity and heritage, respect that doesn't require us to accept geological claims, but does require us to understand why those claims emerged and what they mean to the people who hold them. It leaves us with curiosity about what actually is underwater, about what we'll discover as marine archaeology advances, about the real story of human settlement on now submerged coastlines, about Tamil history that we don't yet know but might learn. And it leaves us with complexity, with the understanding that truth is not always simple, that cultural truth and geological truth are different categories, that both can be valid even when they contradict, that honoring people's identity narratives, while also maintaining scientific rigor, requires nuance rather than binary thinking. The Indian Ocean, as you drift towards sleep, is warm around you, supportive. Its waters hold dissolved memories, sediments containing fragments of the past, currents that connect distant shores. This ocean saw the Chola navy sail to Southeast Asia, saw Tamil merchants trade with Rome, saw coastal settlements built and drowned and built again, saw civilization rise and persist despite catastrophe. Whether or not it hides Kumari Kandam, whether or not a continent lies beneath these waves, this ocean definitely holds stories, holds evidence, holds the truth that Tamil culture has ancient roots and remarkable achievements, holds validation that the core memory of lands lost to rising seas is absolutely real. And in the end, maybe that's enough. Maybe the conversation doesn't need to be about continents versus coastal plains. Maybe it can be about recognizing both what we know and what we don't, celebrating what Tamil culture actually achieved while remaining open to what we might still discover, respecting identity while respecting evidence, honoring memory while pursuing truth. The water grows darker as you sink deeper, pressure building, temperature dropping. But there's something peaceful about these depths, something quieting. Down here, the surface debates seem distant, muffled, less urgent. Down here, there is only the slow settling of sediments, the patient accumulation of layers, the quiet work of time covering and preserving, evidence waiting for future archaeologists. Fragments of truth mixed with fragments of poetry, both valuable, both real in their own ways. Tamil poets of the Sangam period understood impermanence, understood that great cities fall, that kingdoms crumble, that the ocean takes what it will. Yet they wrote anyway, created beauty anyway, insisted on meaning anyway. Their poems survived when their cities didn't. Their words outlasted stone. That's its own kind of triumph, its own proof of significance. Poetry that endures for over 2,000 years doesn't need a lost continent to validate its importance. It validates itself simply by being extraordinary, by capturing human experience so precisely that people centuries later still recognize themselves in it. And if those poets wrote that the ocean took their homeland, we should take them seriously, not necessarily literally, not at continental scale, but seriously. They knew what they'd lost, they mourned it, they preserved the memory, and now we're discovering they were right. The ocean did take Tamil lands. We're finding those lands underwater. Their memory was true, even if the scale expanded through mythic time. This is the paradox we've been circling, the thing that makes this story so compelling and so complicated. Kumari Kandam as geological continent probably doesn't exist, but Kumari Kandam as cultural truth absolutely does. And the lands lost to the sea were real, and the sophisticated civilization that built on those lands was real, and the trauma of colonization that made an overclaimed origin story necessary was real. All of it matters. All of it is part of the story. Sleep comes easier, perhaps, when we stop demanding simple answers, when we let complexity be complex, when we allow both and, instead of insisting on either or. Tamil culture is ancient and accomplished fact. Some Tamil lands were submerged by post-glacial sea level rise fact. Kumari Kandam as continent-sized landmass isn't supported by geology fact. Kumari Kandam as cultural symbol matters deeply to Tamil identity. All of these can be true simultaneously because they're operating in different registers, describing different aspects of reality. And the ocean, the actual Indian Ocean of geology and chemistry and physics, continues its cycles regardless of our interpretations. The water evaporates, forms clouds, rains, runs back to the sea, sediments erode from land and settle on the seafloor, tectonic plates continue their millimeter-per-year movements, life adapts to every available niche. The planet does what planets do, entirely indifferent to human meaning-making. But meaning matters to us. We're meaning-making creatures. We can't help but story the world, create narratives, build identities from those narratives, insist that we came from somewhere that matters. This is human. This is universal. This is what Kumari Kandam is really about. The profoundly human need to have a homeland, to have roots, to have a past worthy of the future we're trying to build. Every person watching this, wherever you are in the world, comes from somewhere that your ancestors considered homeland. That place lives in you, in your language, your customs, your sense of who you are. And if someone tried to tell you that place didn't matter, that your ancestors didn't matter, that your culture was derivative or primitive or insignificant, you would resist. You would insist. You would claim your significance, even if you had to exaggerate to be heard. This is what Tamil scholars did, what Tamil culture does, what Kumari Kandam represents. Resistance, insistence, refusal to be diminished. And we should honor that even as we maintain geological accuracy. We should understand the profound humanity behind the mythic claim, the dignity it represents, the identity it protects. Because at its heart, Kumari Kandam isn't really about whether a continent existed or didn't exist. It's about whether a people's story matters, whether their memory deserves respect, whether their identity has validity, and the answer to those questions is unambiguous. Yes, absolutely, without question. The current carries you now, gentle, steady, through waters that have held these stories for centuries, past coastlines that have shifted and changed, over shelves that were once dry land, through depths that have seen civilizations rise and fall on the shores above. And if you listen carefully, in that space between waking and sleeping where imagination and memory blur, you might hear them, the Tamil poets of the Sangam, their voices preserved in verses that outlasted stone, speaking of beauty and loss, of love and war, of the impermanence of power and the persistence of art, of lands that the ocean took, and memories that survived the taking. You might hear them saying, "We were here, we created beauty. We understood the world and rendered it in language that still moves people millennia later. We were sophisticated and urban and connected to the wider world. We built cities and wrote poetry and traded across oceans and made mathematical discoveries. We mattered. We matter still. And our memory of what the ocean took, whether you call it Kumari Kandam or simply acknowledge it as drowned coastline, that memory is real and deserves to be honored. Not dismissed, not debunked, but understood in all its complexity. And whether or not you find a continent in these depths, you find them, their voices, their insistence, their truth. The ocean cradles you, warm and dark and patient, holding more than geology can measure, holding memory, identity, meaning, holding the space where cultural truth and physical fact both exist, neither negating the other, both real, both important. These waters have witnessed everything: the slow rise that drowned coastlines, the civilizations that thrived and fell, the poets who wrote their memories, the colonizers who tried to erase them, the scholars who fought to reclaim them. All of it is here, dissolved in these depths, part of the story that continues tonight. Tamil civilization needs no lost continent to be worthy of respect, but Tamil people deserve to have their cultural narratives honored, even when those narratives aren't geologically literal. This is the balance, the nuance, the complexity we carry with us into sleep. Down here in the depths where light doesn't reach and pressure squeezes tight, where cold water moves in currents that have circulated for centuries, where sediments settle grain by grain covering the past, there is something that feels like truth, multiple truths, layered, complex, resistant to simple summary. There is the truth of geology, plates and processes, evidence and measurements, the actual history of how the planet works. This truth matters. This truth is real. There is the truth of archaeology, discoveries and artifacts, settlements and structures, the actual evidence of who lived where and when. This truth matters. This truth is real. There is the truth of literature, Sangam poems and classical epics, verses demonstrating sophistication and antiquity, the actual proof of Tamil accomplishment. This truth matters. This truth is real. And there is the truth of identity, cultural memory and post-colonial pride, the meaning Kumari Kandam holds, regardless of its geological status, the actual function it serves for Tamil people. This truth matters. This truth is real. All of them, existing simultaneously in these dark waters, none of them negating the others, all of them part of the larger story of what it means to be human, to need homeland and history, to create meaning from the material world, to insist on significance, despite dismissal. The water darkens further as sleep approaches, the boundary between ocean and dream growing permeable, and in this liminal space, Kumari Kandam exists exactly as much as it needs to, not as geology but as poetry, not as continent but as continuity, not as fact but as truth, the deeper truth that transcends measurement. Tamil culture survives, thrives, even maintaining its language and traditions into the modern era, creating new literature and music and film, while honoring its ancient roots. The thing that colonialism tried to submerge remained buoyant. The identity that dismissal tried to erase persisted. The significance that British academics denied is now undeniable. And maybe that's the real triumph. Not finding a lost continent, but maintaining found identity, not recovering a drowned homeland, but never losing the culture it spawned, not proving the colonizers wrong through pseudoscience, but outlasting the colonizers entirely, surviving until truth could be told without needing their validation. Tamil civilization was here, is here, will be here, creating beauty and meaning regardless of what's underwater, regardless of continental configurations, regardless of who acknowledges or denies or debates. The Sangam poets wrote their truth, and it survived, and that's its own form of immortality. The ocean can take cities, can flood coastlines, can submerge entire landscapes, but it cannot drown identity, cannot submerge culture, cannot wash away the essential continuity of a people who refuse to be erased. This is what the depths teach us if we listen. Persistence, the quiet endurance of what matters, the way truth settles like sediment, layer upon layer, complex and nuanced, resistant to simple summary, but absolutely real. And as you drift now towards sleep, carried by currents of contemplation and imagination, let the debates rest, let the arguments settle, let the complexity simply be complex. Tamil culture is ancient and worthy. Some lands were drowned. Memory is real even when it mythologizes. Identity matters even when it exaggerates. All of this can be true. All of this is true. The ocean carries you now through waters that have held these tensions for millennia, that have absorbed the grief of communities watching their coastlines disappear, that have preserved the remains of cities that once thrived where now only fish swim. These waters don't take sides in human arguments about what's real and what's symbolic. They simply exist, constant in their inconstancy, forever moving, forever changing, forever holding more than we can fully grasp. In these depths, the distinction between cultural truth and geological fact becomes less important, not because truth doesn't matter, but because both kinds of truth can coexist in the same space, serving different needs, answering different questions. The ocean took Tamil lands. This is geological fact. Tamil people remember and honor that loss through Kumari Kandam. This is cultural fact. Both are real. Both deserve respect. Both tell us something important about what it means to be human, to need stories that explain who we are and where we come from, to insist on significance even when the world tries to diminish us. The Indian Ocean continues its cycles, tides rising and falling, currents circulating, sediments settling, life adapting, and deep beneath these waters, whether continent or coastline, whether myth or memory, whether symbolic or literal, lie stories that matter, truths that deserve respect, and a culture's insistence on its own significance that we would all do well to honor. Marine archaeologists will continue their work, slowly mapping the submerged coastlines, recovering artifacts, building our understanding of what actually lies beneath these waves. Geneticists will continue tracing lineages, understanding how populations moved and mixed. Linguists will continue analyzing the relationships between languages, the deep history encoded in grammar and vocabulary. Geologists will continue refining their understanding of sea level change, of coastal processes, of how landscapes transform over millennia, and all of this work, all of this investigation, will add pieces to the puzzle without ever fully resolving the question of what Kumari Kandam means, because that question isn't purely scientific. It's also cultural, emotional, political, deeply human. What we can say with confidence is that Tamil civilization has genuine antiquity, that the ocean did take coastal lands, that cultural memory preserved this loss, and that the need for origin stories is universal. What we can also say is that respecting Tamil culture doesn't require us to accept unsupported geological claims, and maintaining scientific rigor doesn't require us to dismiss the cultural importance of Kumari Kandam. These aren't contradictory positions. They're different ways of understanding the same complex reality. Sleep comes as the water closes over you, warm and dark and safe, the depths receiving you gently. And in this space between waking and dreaming, between debate and acceptance, between geology and poetry, Kumari Kandam exists exactly as much as it needs to, as cultural truth, as Tamil identity, as the unsubmergible insistence that a people matters, that a culture endures, that memory transcends the ocean's depths. Good night, from Simply About Earth. Sleep well.